Mike Sampson jolted awake to a blinding light flooding his studio apartment. He shielded his eyes as crackling arcs of blue energy danced across his body, every nerve suddenly detonating in anguished fire. Paralysis gripped his muscles even as he tried to cry out. Looming figures materialized amidst the electrical flare, grotesque bipedal reptilians with leering crimson eyes and taloned hands. Their lipless maws stretched wide, lolling forked tongues scenting the air as they surrounded Mike's prone form. Guttural alien words were hissed back and forth, the meaning opaque but dripping with malign intent. Mike's world became a whirlwind of thrashing limbs and piercing shrieks as he was wrenched from the safety of his apartment. His fingernails raked futilely across floorboards until the reptilians pinned his flailing appendages, injecting him with an insidious, inky ichor. Sedation flooded his mind in cloying chemical shockwaves, subsuming him into a lightless gulf of terrified delirium. When consciousness sputtered back, he found himself entombed in a claustrophobic metal chamber. Tubes and cables snaked across his naked, bruised body, adhering to his flesh with osculating mouthparts that pumped calibrated chemistries through his bloodstream. The chamber's curved walls throbbed with alien energies and holographic readouts, scrawling reams of data in indecipherable xenolinguistics. Mike retched in breathless cycles, his throat burning from acidic expulsions. Liquid terror coursed through his veins as unfathomable implications slowly crystallized. He'd been abducted by aliens for reasons his traumatized psyche refused to countenance. Test subject, lab rat, biological curiosity, none of those roles offered any shred of consolation as the chamber's atmosphere toxified with soporific aerosols and dragged him back into oblivion's void. Has it been hours? Days? Weeks? Mike drifted in and out of muddled consciousness, his bearings unmoored from any sense of time's passage. Periods of lucidity were fleeting islands amid an endless ocean of drugged delirium. The only constant was the steady throb of his heartbeat reminding him he still clung to life. Alien machinery buzzed and chirped all around him in a maddening industrial symphony. Icy metal restraints bit into his wrists and ankles with every feeble twitch of struggle against their corrosive bite. Mike's throat was raw from bellowing until his voice gave out hoarse howls of mutinous fury directed at his unseen jailers. Visions flickered at the peripheries of his sedation-blurred mind. Arcane readouts and holographic displays bathing him in eldritch kaleidoscopic hues. Twisting shapes moving just outside his field of vision. Forms that struck primordial chords of terror within his fraying psyche. Where was he? What fresh abomination had he been submitted to by these things? His memories were scorched ashes swirling in mental windstorms, cyclones of delirium peeling back each successive layer of reality until only the stark existential core remained: survive, escape, or die. Each agonizing return to lucidity saw Mike renewing his struggles against the restraints with snarling desperation. He could feel his body's resistance to the sedatives gradually building, his flashes of cognizance persisting for longer intervals before the soporific tsunami dragged him back under. He pulled at the bonds until his wrists ran with blood, snarling through clenched teeth as his muscles screamed in agony. Every iota of leverage was exploited, his frame bowing into a tortured arch as tendons and ligaments strained in rebellion against the metal's embrace. Something had to give. He could feel the integrity of his bonds slowly compromising, a hairline fracture caulking, threads shearing apart with each explosive exertion. The acrid tang of his own sweat and desperation flooded Mike's nostrils, lending visceral momentum to his thrashings as sanity ebbed. With a scream of cathartic ferocity, one strap's corroded links finally severed under his single-minded throes. An arm broke free, flailing wildly as it summited its shackled peak. Mike's roars achieved a galvanizing fervor as realization blossomed: his escape was now inevitable, even if it meant shredding every tendon and dislocating every bone. He needed to escape. He needed to get back home. The chamber reverberated with the wail of klaxons, their shrill cries cutting through the air like banshees unleashed. Warning lights pulsed in a frenzied dance, casting eerie shadows across the metallic walls. They knew he was free. The stench of burning insulation seared Mike's nostrils as he clawed his way free of the shattered alien wreckage. Jagged shards of metal sliced deep into his palms, warm blood streaming over his trembling fingers. He sucked in a ragged breath of toxins and smoke, instantly doubling over in a fit of rasping coughs that lasted until spots clouded his vision. Disoriented, he dragged himself across a carpet of mangled bodies and severed limbs. The dead seemed to leer at him with glassy eyes, their jaws frozen in forever screams of agony. He retched uncontrollably at the sight, vomiting up streams of sour bile until his abdomen clenched with painful spasms. "Get up!" His mind screamed the command like a slaver's lash. Trembling, Mike rose to his feet, nearly collapsing again as his gaze fell upon the ruined wasteland surrounding him. The alien craft's hull had been torn asunder, scattering twisted wreckage across a desolate clearing. In the distance, a verdant alien jungle extended in every direction, its dense foliage seeming to pulse with threats undiscerned. His first urges were to curl up and expire like the corpses at his feet. Let this nightmare claim him. Perhaps in oblivion's void he might find merciful respite. But a more primal drive recoiled within him, the ingrained human compulsion to persevere, no matter how hopeless or harrowing the circumstances. Stumbling through the burning wreckage, Mike became a scavenger parsing through the leavings of carnage. A sharpened length of metal shearing became his first weapon, still streaked with the fluorescent blood of its alien former owner. Strips of insulation were wrapped around his lacerated palms as makeshift bandages. Clutching the blade, he forged on into the unknown depths of the jungle, its shadows and stifling humidity seeming to swallow him whole as he ventured heedlessly forward with no clear destination. All that mattered was putting distance between himself and the haunting mass grave of the alien craft. Days stretched into soul-lacerating weeks as Mike wandered the primordial arboreal maze, slowly surrendering vestiges of his former life with each agonizing step. The blood-sodden layers of his tattered clothing gradually fell away until he moved through the jungle's gloom entirely nude and feral. His fair skin was sunburnt and leathery, his once pampered hands transformed into gnarled claws. While the sustenance of unfamiliar alien vegetation helped slake his thirst, hunger remained his constant goad and tormentor. He eyed the scurrying forms of reptilian creatures with the raptor focus of a starving animal until the will to survive eclipsed all human compunction. Using his sharpened metal shard, he dissected and consumed his first kill like a ravening beast, slurping up morsels of glistening flesh and shredding hide with his bare teeth. The act was a sordid rebirth, irrevocably severing him from his former existence. With each hunt, each successful skirmish against the jungle's myriad lethal threats, he lost more of whatever lingering humanity still persisted. When at last he encountered the giant bipedal alien hunters, Mike was all but unrecognizable. His filthy, emaciated form was caked in dried sweat, grime, and ichors of past kills. His salt-encrusted hair hung in matted cords over eyes that no longer showed anything beyond the desperation of a starved predator. Armed with an arsenal of bone spears and crude blades fashioned from discarded alien tech, he fell upon the hunting party with such ferocious savagery that they initially mistook him for a member of their own reptilian species. Bellowing wordless screeches of fury, Mike decapitated and eviscerated with the unreasoning violence of a rabid animal. Only after painting his entire body in the vibrant ichor of his slaughtered adversaries did his primal frenzy begin to abate. He stood in the sanguine entrail-strewn aftermath like a feral pagan idol of warfare. Gone was any glimmer of the man he had once been before his ordeal. That identity was dead, replaced by a nameless, savage demigod whose only purpose was to endure. As Mike submerged himself back into the jungle's leafy shadows, a mad bark of laughter escaped his cracked lips. He was no longer a prisoner to this world. The world itself was now the shackled captive, unable to extinguish the indomitable spark of his will to survive. No depredation, anguish, or madness could extinguish the raging furnace of his need to persevere at any cost. He was the alpha and the omega of this blighted, untamed hell. All else that crossed his path would be subsumed by the remorseless riptide of his existence. Reason, mercy, and hope were antiquated relics he'd gladly use as tinder to stoke the inextinguishable bonfire of his will to endure unto forever. His metamorphosis was complete. The air hung thick and fetid in the Sinmari rainforest, a miasma of rot and desperation. Chur's leathery nostrils flared as he scented his prey, the sweet, cloying musk of human fear. His massive tail lashed back and forth, crushing underbrush with each powerful swing. Wicked talons as long as daggers flexed, eager to rend flesh from bone. Chur signaled his hunting pack with a guttural hiss. 6 hardened killers fanned out in formation, their bodies adorned with jagged scars and ritualistic markings. They moved with a predator's graceful menace through the gloom. Up ahead, the mutilated remains of a previous team littered the jungle floor like obscene blossoms. Entrails painted the foliage in garish streaks of crimson. One corpse hung crucified from a tree trunk, its sightless eyes already being consumed by rapacious insects. A low, bestial growl rumbled from Chur's gaping maw. The human was close. He could taste its acrid stench of terror, could hear its feeble heart hammering like a war drum. His obsidian claws dug into the loamy soil as he inhaled deeply, triangulating the fear pheromones saturating the air. Without warning, bloody carnage erupted. One hunter pitched backwards, impaled by an impossibly long metal spike that seemed to appear from nowhere. Another's head detonated in a crimson mist as something unseen moved through the jungle with blurring speed. Chur roared in fury, the sound shaking leaves from the canopy. His packmates opened fire blindly into the vegetation, high-caliber rounds chewing through wood and pulping anything in their path. For a suspended moment, the forest held its breath, hunkering in dread anticipation. Then it began anew, dismembered limbs and viscera raining from the treetops in a foul deluge. Chur felt white-hot agony erupt across his back as he spun, jaws snapping at his invisible tormentor. A handful of razor-edged flechettes protruded from his armored hide, punched there by immense force. One by one, the hunters fell, their anguished screams abruptly truncated. Only Chur remained, crouched in the greasy mulch, stunned and alone. He snapped his head from side to side, searching in vain for any trace of the human. Without warning, it was there, a blur of movement depositing itself atop Chur's barrel chest, knees pinning his arms. The stench of its fear had transformed to a feral musk of hatred. Chur snarled up at his attacker, hideously deformed jaws stretching wide in a futile attempt to disembowel the human. It leaned in close, pupils glittering like polished obsidian. It smiled mirthlessly, lips pulling back to expose teeth augmented to keen points. In its hands it held a gleaming blade, its mirrored edge seeming to swallow all light. The human's sardonic voice was a slithering whisper. "You should not have brought me here." With a solitary, fluid motion, it drew the blade across Chur's jugular. Boiling green ichor geysered from the gaping wound as the hunter's mighty body shuddered and fell still. The human rose, drenched in Chur's lifeblood, yet seemed utterly apathetic to the horrific violence it had committed. Kralt hissed in frustration as the holographic tactical display flickered through the latest reconnaissance imagery. More of his kinsmen's corpses, strewn like butchered meat among the mangled wreckage of their insertion craft. Around the dimly lit command pavilion, his fellow elders shifted in agitated silence, their armored tails lashing behind them. They knew the implications as well as Kralt. Another extraction team had been massacred by the human fugitive. "This cannot continue," Kralt finally growled, spiked tongue flicking out to taste the tension in the air. "That mammalion's vendetta has already claimed over 50 Karthas' lives. We are hemorrhaging our finest warriors to equatorial folly. What choice remains to us?" One of the elders finally rasped. "We cannot allow such an abomination to range unfettered across the jungle, consumed by hatred and seeking indiscriminate vengeance. And we cannot solicit intervention from any of the greater civilized worlds," snapped another. "To do so admits we attempted sentient species. We just short of confess we broke the intergalactic rights of observation." Perhaps a raspy voice joined the discourse, every head turning to regard the withered form of Kalrax the Ancient. Eyes filmed with cataracts, The wizened elder nonetheless fixed the gathered throng with a stare that demanded deference. Perhaps we have underestimated the magnitude of consequence should we fail to excise this human remnant. Akralt lowered his head in solemn obeisance. Enlighten us, ancestor. Calrax worked his jaws slowly, every word feeling carved rather than spoken. We have already borne witness to the damage one solitary human is capable of perpetrating. With only the basest tools and primordial wrath as weapons. Now ponder, what if this human is allowed to escape and interface with its terrestrial hive-kin? What if a unified human force, augmented by their burgeoning technologies, took offense at our violations and sought unconditional retaliation? A horrified susurrus passed through the assembled Karthas as the implications reverberated. Raising a single gnarled talon, Calrax silenced them and continued in a voice gone deathly quiet. If alone, nameless terrestrial is capable of such devastation, what horrors would befall the Karthas lineage should we face the combined wrath of its entire planet? We risk extinction.